When you discover fairy tales are lies, the pain cuts deeper for having believed them in the first place. Serena knew this truth intimately. Once, she'd clung to foolish hope that perhaps her inability to shift like other wolves wasn't truly shameful, that her barren womb would someday quicken with life, that the man who promised to love her would keep his word despite her defects. Standing before her former mate as he spoke words of apology that meant nothing, she felt something inside her finally break. 5 years of courting, a lifetime of friendship, all discarded for a human girl he'd known mere days. His fated mate, the universe's cruel joke at Serena's expense. "I'm sorry," he said, as if that could mend what was irreparably shattered. In their world, wolves mated for life. What was Serena now but damaged goods, doubly broken, first by her wolfless blood, then by rejection? No pack would welcome her. No mate would claim her. Even her father's bitter reluctance in taking her back spoke volumes about her worth. But fate has strange currents that pull us where we least expect. When the tax collector came with his cold, calculating eyes, Serena didn't know her worthless life was about to become a pawn in a game played by kings and monsters. She couldn't have imagined that her greatest weakness would become her unexpected strength, or that the most feared alpha in 7 territories would look upon her broken pieces and see something worth claiming. In a world where strength meant survival and weakness invited death, Serena would discover that some chains bind while others transform, and that sometimes the stories we tell in darkness can change our destinies in ways no fairy tale ever promised. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The iron shackles around Serena's wrists had rubbed her skin raw, but she was long past caring about such small pains. Standing on the wooden platform in the center of the marketplace, she kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching shadows shift as potential buyers circled like vultures. "Next lot," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Female, 22 years, house-trained, literate. He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her head up. Decent teeth, all limbs intact, bit scrawny, but she'll fill out with proper feeding. Serena's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she didn't resist. Fighting only made things worse. She'd learned that lesson months ago when her pack fell to raiders. The strong were killed, the weak were sold. She fell somewhere in between, which meant she got to endure this. "Starting bid is 50 silver, the auctioneer announced. Silence stretched across the marketplace like a held breath. 50 silver might as well be 50 gold. She could see it in the dismissive glances, the way buyers looked through her rather than at her. Too thin, too plain, too broken by years of hunger and hardship. 30 silver, the auctioneer tried, his voice losing confidence. A few men stepped closer, examining her like livestock. Their eyes were cold, calculating. She knew what they were thinking. Kitchen slave, field hand, something disposable. "She's trained as a healer," the auctioneer added desperately. "Knows herbs, can set bones, birthing work." The scattered laughter that followed made her stomach clench. "Who needs a healer when you've got claws and fast healing?" someone called out. 20 silver, came a gravelly voice from the crowd. Serena's blood ran cold. The man who stepped forward was broad and scarred, with yellowed teeth and hands that looked like they'd broken more bones than healed them. His eyes stripped her bare, and she saw her future written in his cruel smile. Back-breaking labor, beatings for the smallest mistakes, a life measured in bruises and fear. 20 silver from Gareth, the auctioneer said, relief clear in his voice. "Do I hear 25? The silence was deafening. Gareth grinned, already counting his coins. 15, he said, haggling like she was a sack of grain. "Look at her. She's half dead already. Lucky if she lasts the winter." The auctioneer's face fell. "Sir, surely. 15 or I walk," Gareth snarled. Serena closed her eyes, trying to summon what little strength she had left. Maybe if she worked hard, kept quiet, didn't give him reason to hurt her. 15 silver, the auctioneer protested. "No one else wants her, and you know it," Gareth interrupted. The reply died in the auctioneer's throat as a ripple of tension swept through the marketplace. Serena's wolf stirred uneasily, scenting something in the air. Power, raw and overwhelming, mixed with fear and awe from the crowd. Her skin prickled with awareness. Every instinct screamed at her to lower her eyes, to make herself small, to submit to whatever force had just entered their midst. The very air seemed to thicken, charged with an authority so absolute it made her bones ache. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter cut off abruptly. Even the crying children fell silent. "My king," someone whispered, the words barely audible. "The Alpha King," another voice breathed. Against every rule of survival she'd learned, Serena glanced up. The crowd parted like water, people dropping to their knees as a figure moved through them with predatory grace. The auctioneer had gone white as parchment, his hands trembling as he gripped his podium. And then she saw him. 100 gold. The voice cut through the marketplace like a blade through silk, cold and final. Serena's eyes snapped fully open now, her gaze locked on the man who commanded such absolute deference. Her wolf whimpered, pressing low in submission, even as her human mind reeled with disbelief. He stood apart from the others, tall and commanding, dark hair falling across a face carved from stone, all sharp angles and harder edges. His clothes were fine, but practical. A man who could afford the best, but didn't need to flaunt it. The Alpha King. Serena's knees nearly buckled. She'd never seen him before, but she knew him instantly. Everyone knew him. The conqueror of the northern territories. The wolf who built an empire on the bones of his enemies. What could he possibly want with her? 100 gold, the auctioneer stammered. "My lord, are you certain? You doubt your king's word?" The Alpha King's voice was cold as winter wind, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. Gareth's face had gone pale. "My lord, I had first claim. You had nothing." Golden eyes flicked to the trembling man with casual disdain. "Leave, now." Gareth practically ran from the marketplace, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. The Alpha King stepped onto the platform, and suddenly the space felt impossibly small. This close, Serena could see the power that rolled off him in waves. Not just physical strength, but something deeper, more primal. He studied her with those unsettling golden eyes, his expression unreadable. "You're a healer." The question caught her off guard. Of all the things he could ask, of all the reasons he might have bought her. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I was trained by the Moonbloom Pack's elders. I know herbs, bone setting, midwifery." Hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. Maybe this was why he saved her. Maybe he valued her skills, saw her as more than just another body to be used and discarded. "Good," he said simply, then turned away. "Rowan." A massive warrior stepped forward, his scarred face professionally blank. "Alpha King, take her to the fortress. See that she's fed and cleaned." He didn't look back at Serena as he strided away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. "Wait!" Serena called out, taking a step forward. "My lord, I can show you." Rowan's hand clamped down on her shoulder, stopping her cold. "Rule 1, he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You don't speak to the Alpha King unless he addresses you directly. Rule 2, you never ever look him in the eyes. Your property now, girl. Valuable property, but property all the same." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she nodded numbly. At least she wasn't going to be beaten to death in Gareth's fields. At least someone valued her healing enough to pay for it. At least she was alive. As Rowan led her away from the marketplace, Serena caught one last glimpse of the Alpha King's retreating form. He saved her. Maybe not out of kindness, but he saved her nonetheless. And if he wanted a healer, she'd be the best healer he'd ever seen. She had to be. It was the only chance she had. The journey to the Alpha King's territory stretched endlessly ahead. Serena's bare feet, still tender from months of captivity, bled against the rocky mountain path. Around her, the king's warriors moved with fluid grace, their massive forms shifting between human and wolf as the terrain demanded. She couldn't remember the last time she'd shifted. Months of starvation had left her wolf weak and dormant, buried so deep she could barely sense her anymore. "Useless, Omega," one of the warriors muttered, earning harsh laughter from his companions. "King wasted his gold on that one. Should have left her for the vultures," another added. The words stung more than her bleeding feet. She'd heard worse in the slave camps, but somehow these men's casual dismissal cut deeper. They served the king. If they thought she was worthless, what did that say about his judgment in buying her? Maybe she's not meant for shifting, Rowan said gruffly. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Healers got other uses. Like what? The warrior's laugh was ugly. Healing's for weaklings who can't take pain. Real wolves heal themselves. Or they die, another added with grim satisfaction. That's how you keep the pack strong. On the third day, her body finally betrayed her completely. The world tilted sideways, and suddenly she was face down in the dirt, her vision swimming. Should have known she wouldn't last, someone sneered. Weak little Omega can't even walk properly. Leave her. We've wasted enough time. Through her haze of exhaustion, Serena heard the heavy tread of boots approaching. She braced herself for a kick, for rough hands dragging her upright, for the casual cruelty she'd learned to expect. Instead, gentle arms lifted her from the ground. The scent hit her first. Pine and steel and something indefinably wild that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. Then she realized who was carrying her, and shock drove the breath from her lungs. The Alpha King held her like she weighed nothing, his massive frame steady and sure as he navigated the treacherous mountain path. She could feel the controlled power in his arms, the careful way he adjusted his grip to keep her comfortable. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her whispered apologies, but he carried her up the mountain nonetheless, his warriors falling into respectful silence behind them. Through half-closed eyes, she saw their destination emerge from the mist, a fortress carved into the mountainside itself, all black stone and sharp angles. It looked less like a home and more like a weapon thrust into the sky, its towers reaching toward the clouds like claws. This is it, she thought, as they passed through the towering gates. The courtyard beyond confirmed her fears. Warriors drilled in perfect formation, their snarls and clashing weapons echoing off stone walls. Even the children mirrored their savagery, tiny faces set in fierce scowls as they practiced combat forms with wooden swords. No one smiled, no one laughed. The very air seemed heavy with barely restrained violence. Serena thought this might be the most joyless place she'd ever seen. The king deposited her gently in the main courtyard, gesturing to a stern-faced woman who hurried forward. But before the woman could take her away, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Welcome back, nephew." The words were honey-smooth but left ice in their wake. A tall warrior approached, so similar to the king they could be brothers, but older, with cruelty etched into every line of his face. His pale eyes assessed Serena with the same consideration one might give a piece of rotting meat. "Is this the healer you purchased?" he asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of the investment. "It is, Uncle Craven," the king replied, his voice holding a note of deference that surprised Serena. Craven's lip curled in distaste. "And you carried her here, where the entire pack could see?" The stern-faced woman tugged urgently at Serena's arm, trying to hurry her away from the tension crackling between the two men. But Serena couldn't help but hear Craven's next words, spoken low, but carrying clearly in the stone courtyard. "The pack watches everything you do, nephew. Every gesture, every moment of weakness. We cannot afford softness. Not when we've worked so hard to build our reputation." "She couldn't walk," the king began. "She was weak," Craven cut him off. "And now they've all seen you coddle weakness. What if our enemies heard of this?" The servant's grip tightened on Serena's arm, practically dragging her toward the fortress entrance. "That was Craven," she whispered urgently. "The pack's beta and the king's uncle. If you value your life, girl, you'll pray he forgets you exist." As they disappeared into the shadows of the fortress, Serena could still hear the two men arguing in low, tense voices. 3 weeks passed in the fortress, and Serena learned to navigate its harsh rhythms. Dawn brought the clash of weapons in the courtyards, the snarls of warriors testing their strength against one another. Midday saw the servants scurrying through stone corridors, keeping the massive structure running with silent efficiency. Evening brought exhausted fighters limping back to their quarters, nursing wounds that could heal so much faster with proper care. But no one asked for that care. Serena scrubbed floors and tended fires, grateful for the steady meals and warm bed that came with her servitude. The work was hard but honest, and no one raised a hand to her, a luxury she'd almost forgotten existed. Still, watching the daily suffering around her made her heart ache. She saw a young warrior struggling to use his sword arm after a training injury, his shoulder clearly dislocated. When she approached with gentle hands and healing energy already warming her palms, he recoiled as if she'd offered him poison. Get away from me, he snarled, backing against the wall. I don't need your Omega weakness. But I could help. Help? The warrior spat the word like a curse. Real wolves heal themselves or die trying. That's what makes us strong. The incident drew a crowd. Other warriors gathered to watch, their faces twisted with disgust, as if she'd committed some unthinkable blasphemy. A senior fighter pushed through the group, his scarred face thunderous. What's this Omega doing? He demanded. Trying to corrupt Dane with her healing nonsense, someone called out. Healing's for the weak, another added. No true warrior needs it. The senior fighter's eyes narrowed on Serena. You were bought as a servant, not a healer. Remember your place, Omega. Shame burned her cheeks as she retreated, but confusion burned hotter. If the king had bought her as a servant, why ask about her healing at all? Why pay 100 gold for someone to scrub floors? The pattern repeated itself over the following days. A kitchen maid burned her hand on a hot pot. Serena offered to heal it, and got shouted at for encouraging clumsiness. A guard developed a festering cut that could turn dangerous. Her suggestion of treatment earned her a lecture about how real wolves don't coddle minor wounds. Each rejection chipped away at her hope a little more. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe the king had asked about her healing just to confirm what he was buying, not because he intended to use those skills. But then why carry her up the mountain? Why show such unexpected gentleness to a mere servant? The question gnawed at her until she couldn't stand it anymore. Her chance came one evening as she was cleaning the Great Hall. The king strode through with several advisors discussing patrol routes and supply lines. His voice carried the same cold authority she remembered from the auction. But there was something else there, too. A weariness that made her heart clench unexpectedly. This was her moment. She had to know. My lord, she called softly, stepping forward with her cleaning rag clutched in her hands. The conversation stopped dead. The advisors turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. The king's golden eyes flicked to her briefly before looking away as if she were beneath notice. My lord, I wanted to ask about— How dare you? One of the advisors stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. A servant does not address the Alpha King directly. But I'm a healer, Serena protested, desperation making her voice rise. He bought me as a healer. Surely he wants me to— You are nothing, the advisor snarled. You speak when spoken to. Not before. Rowan appeared from nowhere, his hand clamping down on her shoulder with bruising force. My apologies, Alpha King. The Omega forgets her place. See that it doesn't happen again, the king said coldly, and continued walking as if she never existed. Serena's heart sank as Rowan dragged her away, his lecture about proper behavior washing over her like noise. Frustration built in her chest until she could barely breathe. If she wasn't meant to heal, why wouldn't anyone simply tell her? Why this cruel pretense that her skills mattered when clearly they didn't? But the next morning, everything changed. She was sweeping the training courtyard when she heard the sickening crack of bone breaking wrong. A boy, no more than 12, crashed to the ground during an aerial combat drill, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The child tried to stand and collapsed with a cry that tore at her heart. Around the courtyard, warriors watched with cold indifference. This was their way. Pain builds character. Suffering creates strength. Craven strode over, his pale eyes bright with cruel satisfaction. Pathetic, he sneered, grabbing the boy's broken arm and twisting until another bone cracked. This is what weakness looks like. This is what we destroy. The boy's scream echoed off the stone walls, and something in Serena snapped. She didn't think. She didn't consider consequences or proper behavior or the 100 rules that governed her existence here. She just ran. Stop! The word tore from her throat as she dropped to her knees beside the child. Her hands were already glowing with healing energy, warmth flowing from her palms into his broken body. The boy's sobs quieted, as bones knit and torn muscle wove back together. His legs straightened, the unnatural angle correcting itself with gentle precision. When she finished, he stared at her with confused wonder, as if kindness were a language he'd forgotten how to speak. What is this? Craven's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Serena looked up to find him looming over her, his face twisted with rage. Behind him, she could see the king approaching with measured steps, his expression unreadable. Your Omega pet defies our ways, Craven spat, his words dripping venom. She healed the weakness we were trying to burn out. She must be punished. The king stopped beside them, his golden eyes studying the scene. The boy sat up easily, his leg fully healed, while Serena knelt beside him with her hands still glowing faintly with residual energy. Any other Omega would cower now, would beg forgiveness, and promise never to transgress again. But Serena lifted her chin and met the king's gaze directly, silently daring him to punish her for an act of mercy. His nostrils flared slightly as he read the defiance in her face. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with tension. Then, "The boy is more useful healed," he said simply. "He can return to training sooner." Craven's fist slammed against the nearest wall. "Nephew, enough!" The king's voice carried the full weight of his alpha power, making every warrior in the courtyard flinch. "Do not question me again." As guards escorted Serena back toward the fortress, she felt Craven's hatred burning into her back like acid. But it was the king's expression that haunted her. That brief moment when his mask slipped, showing something that might have been gratitude. The days following the incident in the courtyard felt different. Serena moved through her duties with renewed purpose, waiting for someone to seek her out, to ask for the healing the king had publicly defended. Surely now that he'd sided with her in front of the entire pack, things would change. She could finally prove her worth, show him that his 100 gold hadn't been wasted on a mere servant. She found herself thinking of him more than she should. The way his golden eyes had assessed the healed boy, the careful neutrality of his expression that somehow felt like approval. He'd protected her choice when he could have easily sided with his uncle. That had to mean something. But no one came. Warriors still nursed their wounds in stubborn silence. Servants still treated injuries as shameful weaknesses to be hidden. The culture of suffering ran too deep to change overnight, even with royal endorsement. Still, Serena allowed herself to hope. Maybe it just takes time. The knock at her door came after the evening meal, sharp and authoritative. A guard she didn't recognize stood in the hallway, his expression professionally blank. "You're to come with me," he said simply. "Where?" Serena asked, setting down her mending. "The Alpha King wants a word." Her heart stopped, then started again, hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. The king wanted to see her privately. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he had work for her. Maybe he wanted to discuss how she could best serve the pack's healing needs. Or maybe she was in trouble. The guard led her through corridors she'd never seen before, deeper into the fortress, where only the highest-ranking wolves were allowed. Her bare feet whispered against stone floors as they climbed winding stairs toward what must be the royal chambers. When the guard stopped before massive oak doors and knocked, Serena's palms were slick with nervous sweat. "Enter," came the familiar voice from within. The doors swung open to reveal a chamber that took her breath away. Rich tapestries lined the walls, and a fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a deer. The space was warm and comfortable in a way the rest of the fortress wasn't. A private sanctuary away from the harsh realities of pack life. And there, silhouetted against the firelight, stood the Alpha King. He'd shed his formal attire for simple, dark clothing that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. The flames cast dancing shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the predatory grace of his movements as he turned to face her. His golden eyes met hers for a moment before she remembered herself and dropped her gaze to the floor. Her heart pounded so loudly in the sudden silence that she was certain he could hear it. "You may leave us," he told the guard, who bowed and retreated, closing the doors with a soft click. Now they were alone. Serena kept her eyes fixed on her bare feet, hyper-aware of every breath, every small sound. The silence stretched until she couldn't stand it anymore. "You wanted to see me, my lord." "I did." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, but still carrying that unmistakable authority. About what happened in the courtyard. Her stomach clenched. "My lord, You healed him." "Well, The boy will fight again tomorrow," he interrupted, and she could hear him moving closer. Serena's heart sank. If he's not angry, then why does he sound so distant? "Thank you, my lord. I only wanted to help. But this is not our way." His tone hardened, becoming the cold, commanding voice she remembered from the auction. "Here we earn our strength through pain. Fighting through injury proves a warrior's worth. You dishonored him by taking away that chance." The words hit her like a physical blow. "My lord, I don't understand. You defended my actions. I defended the practical outcome." He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, catch his scent of pine and steel, and something wild that made her Omega Wolf whimper. A healed warrior returns to duty faster, but that doesn't mean I approve of the method. Serena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to accept his words without question. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the territory. His word was law, but something in his voice didn't match his words, something that sounded almost like reluctance. "I understand it's not your way, my lord," she said carefully, finally daring to look up at him. "But surely, in some cases, there's no need for unnecessary suffering. It can't be efficient to lose warriors to injuries that could be easily healed." His jaw tightened, and for a moment something raw flickered across his features. Pain, maybe, or old anger. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but heavy with memory. "When I was young, my pack was slaughtered." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "We were too open, too trusting. We believed in mercy, in helping others, in showing weakness as strength." His golden eyes burned into hers. "It made us soft, unprepared. When the attack came, we fell like wheat before the scythe." Serena's breath caught. She could see it now, a young boy watching his world burn, learning that kindness equals death. "My uncle saved me," he continued, his voice growing harder. "He and a handful of survivors. We swore we would never make the same mistake. We would be strong, always. We would show no weakness that our enemies could exploit." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Is this understood?" The weight of his alpha power pressed down on her, demanding submission, demanding agreement. But underneath the command, she heard the echo of that frightened boy who lost everything. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, her heart breaking for him, even as it broke for herself. He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of regret, perhaps, or reluctance. "We will use your abilities only in cases of true emergency," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him something. "When a warrior's life hangs in the balance, not for minor injuries that can heal naturally." Serena's eyes snapped to his, hope flaring bright in her chest despite everything. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of, but it was something. It was a chance to help, even if only rarely. "Thank you, my lord," she breathed, dropping into a deep bow. "I understand." She turned toward the door, her mind already racing with possibilities. Emergencies only. She could work with that. "Serena." The sound of her name and his voice stopped her cold. She turned back, suddenly flustered, suddenly too aware of the intimacy of this moment. Alone in his chambers, firelight dancing between them, the careful walls he'd built showing hairline cracks. "Yes, my lord? You should avoid my uncle." The warning was quiet but serious. "Craven doesn't share my practical view of your abilities. It would be wise to stay out of his way." "Oh," she said, and for some reason the thought disappointed her more than it should. "Yes, my lord. I understand." She curtsied again and fled before she could say something foolish, her cheeks burning with embarrassment she couldn't quite name. In the days that followed, Serena tried to honor his wishes. When she saw injuries that could be easily healed, she forced herself to look away. When warriors limped past her with obvious pain, she kept her glowing hands firmly clasped behind her back. But then came the morning when a young she-wolf crashed during an aerial combat drill, her leg twisted wrong with bone jutting through skin. Blood pooled beneath her as she writhed in agony, and Serena knew with sick certainty that without immediate intervention, the girl would bleed out. "This is an emergency." This is exactly what he meant. She didn't hesitate. Her hands were already glowing as she dropped beside the injured wolf, pouring healing energy into the catastrophic wound. Bone straightened, muscle knit, skin sealed without a scar. The girl's agonized screams faded to confused whimpers, then to silence as she stared at her perfectly healed leg in wonder. "How dare you?" Craven's voice cracked like a whip across the training ground. Serena looked up to find him stalking toward her, his pale eyes bright with rage. "This Omega defies our ways again," he snarled to the gathered crowd. "She corrupts our warriors with her weakness." But even as he raged, Serena caught sight of the Alpha King watching from the balcony above. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Approval, satisfaction, and underneath it all, a warmth that had nothing to do with practical efficiency and everything to do with pride. He was proud of what she'd done, despite everything he'd said about their ways, despite his uncle's fury, despite the danger to his reputation. He was proud of what she'd done. The realization hit her like lightning, and suddenly she understood. The conflict wasn't just between her healing and their culture. It was between what the Alpha King was taught to believe and what he actually felt. And maybe she wasn't the only one beginning to change. A week later, Serena woke to the thunder of boots on stone and joined the servants lining the battlements to watch the Alpha King's forces assemble below. "What is happening?" she asked another maid, hurrying outside. The woman sent her a disbelieving look, surprised by Serena's ignorance. "Haven't you heard? The king leaves for battle today." Hundreds of warriors filled the courtyard, some in human form with gleaming armor, others already shifted into their wolf forms, massive beasts with eyes that burned like coals. At their head sat the king on his black destrier, his dark armor fitted perfectly to his powerful frame. His voice carried clearly as he addressed his troops, speaking of honor and strength. The warriors responded with thunderous roars and howls of approval. Serena watched until the last warrior vanished from sight, her heart heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite name. In the days that followed, with the king's intimidating presence absent, something unexpected began to happen. The first sign came when a kitchen maid approached Serena hesitantly, cradling a burned hand against her chest. "Please," the girl whispered, glancing around nervously. "It hurts so much, and the cook says if I can't work, I'll be turned out." Serena healed the burn without hesitation, watching relief flood the girl's face. Word spread quietly through the servants' quarters. The Omega can help, and she will. Soon, others began to seek her out. A stable boy with a kicked shin, a seamstress with fingers pricked raw from rushed needlework, a guard with an infected cut. Each healing was small, hardly the emergencies the king specified. But how could she turn away when they asked so desperately? More importantly, how could she turn away when she saw the change her help brought? The servants began to smile more often. Laughter occasionally drifted through the corridors. Children who once huddled in corners now played games in the courtyards, their giggles echoing off stone walls that had heard precious little joy. The transformation spread slowly, but surely. Warriors who witnessed her healing began to soften their harsh discipline. A trainer who once kicked fallen recruits now helped them to their feet. Even the fortress itself seemed to breathe easier. Where once there was only the sound of clashing weapons and shouted orders, now there was music drifting from the great hall, quiet conversations in the gardens. Serena moved through it all with growing confidence, her healing light touching every corner of the king's domain. She was useful here, needed. For the first time since the auction block, she felt truly alive. But always in the back of her mind, she wondered what he'd think when he returned. Would he see the joy she'd helped create, or only the weakness his uncle warned him about? The answer came 3 weeks later in the middle of the night. Serena jolted awake to the sound of horns blowing, not the triumphant call of victory, but the urgent, desperate wail of emergency. She threw on her cloak and raced outside, her heart pounding as she joined the crowd gathering in the courtyard. Through the gates came 3 riders, their wolves lathered with sweat and foam. The king led them, his armor dented and bloodied, his golden eyes wild with desperation. "Where is she?" the king roared, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Where is the healer?" "Here," Serena called, pushing through the crowd. "I'm here, my lord." Relief flooded his features when he saw her. This close, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the way his hands shook with barely controlled desperation. "My uncle," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He's dying. Silver weapons, poisoned blades. His wolf can't heal this alone, and he won't survive the journey back to the fortress." "How far?" Serena asked, already knowing the answer would be too far for any normal mount. 2 hours, the king replied. "You can ride with me. I'll shift and carry you." She nodded, then hesitated. "My lord, I can shift too. I'm fast. I can keep up." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or approval. His shift was magnificent and terrible to witness. Bones cracked and reshaped. Muscle flowed like water. And where the man stood moments before, a massive black wolf now crouched, easily twice the size of any normal wolf. Serena's own shift came harder, but desperation lent her strength. Soon, a smaller silver wolf stood beside the king's black form. The run was brutal. The king set a punishing pace, his powerful legs eating up the ground with effortless grace. Serena pushed herself harder than she ever had before, her lungs burning, her legs screaming, but she kept up. She had to. A man's life depended on it. They found Craven exactly where the king said they would, in a makeshift camp beside a stream, his remaining warriors standing guard with expressions of grim resignation. The beta lay motionless on a bed of pine boughs, his breathing so shallow it was barely visible. Serena shifted back to human form, not caring about her nakedness in the urgency of the moment. The king followed suit, immediately draping his long campaign cloak around her shoulders before leading her to his uncle's side. "I don't know if I can save him," she whispered, her hands already beginning to glow with healing energy. The wounds were worse than anything she'd ever seen. Silver-tipped arrows had pierced his chest and abdomen, the poisoned metal still embedded deep within his flesh. Black veins spread outward from each wound, the silver poisoning working its way through his system. Internal bleeding had turned his lips blue, and his skin was gray and clammy. "Try," the king said simply, and settled beside her for what she knew would be a long vigil. The healing took hours. Serena poured everything she had into the broken body before her, fighting the silver poison drop by drop, coaxing torn flesh back together thread by thread. The king stayed beside her through it all, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her concentration. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, Craven's breathing had steadied, his skin returning to a healthy color. The silver poison was gone, the wounds closed, life flowing strong through his veins once more. "You did it," the king whispered, his voice rough with emotion. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You saved him." For a moment, they simply sat there in the pre-dawn darkness, her small hand engulfed in his large one, both of them trembling with relief and exhaustion. Then Craven's eyes fluttered open, and the moment shattered. The beta took in the scene with growing horror. His healed body, Serena's glowing hands, the king's protective proximity. His face contorted with rage as understanding dawned. "What have you done?" he snarled, struggling to sit up. "What have you done to me?" "She saved your life," the king replied, his voice carefully controlled. "You were dying, uncle. You should have let me die." Craven's voice cracked with fury. "My death would have motivated our troops, fueled their rage for the final assault. Instead, you've made us all weak with this Omega's tainted healing." The king's face went very still. "You're saying I should have let you die for the sake of our soldiers' anger?" he asked. "Yes." Craven struggled to his feet. "That's what strength looks like. That's what leadership means." The king was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying his uncle's face. "I see," he said finally. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I've grown too soft." He glanced at Serena, and she saw something like apology in his eyes. "Return to the fortress, healer. We'll speak of this later when you've recovered." "My lord," Serena began, but he shook his head. "Go," he said gently. "I need to speak with my uncle privately." As she gathered her cloak and prepared to shift for the long run home, she caught sight of Craven watching her, his pale eyes burning with such hatred that she took an involuntary step backward. This isn't over. In his twisted world view, her healing wasn't a gift. It was a corruption that threatened everything he held dear. The fortress felt different after the king's return. The lightness that had grown in his absence slowly dimmed, replaced by the familiar weight of watchful eyes and whispered warnings. Craven stalked the corridors like a restless predator, his pale gaze seeking out any sign of weakness to crush. Still, people came to Serena. They approached more carefully now, glancing over their shoulders before asking for help. But they came nonetheless. A servant with a twisted ankle, a guard with a festering wound, a kitchen maid whose hands shook too badly to work without healing. She helped them all, but the joy had gone out of it. Where once there was laughter and open gratitude, now there was only furtive relief and nervous glances. It had been 3 weeks since the night she saved Craven's life, and the king hadn't spoken to her once. She caught glimpses of him sometimes, crossing the courtyard with his advisors, reviewing reports in the great hall, training with his warriors. But his golden eyes never sought her out, never acknowledged her presence. It was as if that moment beside the stream, when he'd squeezed her hand and looked at her with such warmth, never happened at all. But she remembered. She replayed that night endlessly in her mind. The desperate ride through the forest, the way he'd matched her pace without complaint, the hours he'd sat vigil beside her as she fought to save his uncle's life. The memory of his hand in hers, strong and warm and reassuring. Most of all, she remembered the moment when he draped his cloak around her naked shoulders, his movements careful and respectful, even in the urgency of the situation. The weight of the fabric had been nothing compared to the weight of his consideration, and the memory made her cheeks burn with feelings she couldn't quite name. The knock at her door came long after the fortress had settled into sleep. Serena opened it to find Craven standing in the hallway, his pale eyes gleaming in the torchlight. "The king wants to see you," he said without preamble. Her heart leaped, then immediately fell. Something in his tone felt wrong, too cold, even for Craven's usual cruelty. "Now, my lord?" "Now," he said firmly, turning away. "Follow me." They walked through corridors she'd never seen before, descending stone steps that grew damper and colder with each level. The dungeons, she realized with growing unease. Why would the king want to meet her here? Was there a prisoner who needed healing? "My lord," she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, "is there an injured person requiring my skills?" Craven didn't answer. They emerged into a circular chamber lined with empty cells. Several guards waited in the shadows, their faces hidden behind iron helms. But there was no prisoner, no injured person requiring her skills, and no king. "My lord," Serena said slowly, turning to face Craven. "Where is the Alpha King?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "He's not coming." Fear crawled up her spine like ice water. The guards shifted closer, their hands moving to their weapons. She was trapped, cornered like prey in a hunting net. "You're going to disappear tonight," Craven continued conversationally. "A tragic accident, perhaps. Or maybe you'll simply wander away, desert your post. These things happen with slaves. Please," she whispered, backing against the stone wall. "I've done nothing wrong. I only wanted to help." "Help?" His voice cracked like a whip. "You call this corruption help? You've made them weak, dependent, soft. You're poison, girl. You're the rot that will destroy everything we've built." She saw the madness in his eyes now, the fanatical certainty that brooked no argument. He truly believed she was a threat to everything he held dear. "My lord, I only seek to heal, and that's exactly why you must die." He lunged forward, his hands reaching for her throat. Serena screamed. The sound echoed off the stone walls, high and desperate. She tried to dodge, but there was nowhere to go. Craven's fingers closed around her neck, and she felt the terrible strength in his grip. Then the chamber exploded into chaos. The king tore through the entrance like an avenging angel, his golden eyes blazing with fury. His roar shook dust from the ceiling as he took in the scene. Serena pinned against the wall, Craven's hands around her throat, the guards moving to surround them. "Let her go," he snarled, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha power. Craven released her, but his face showed no remorse. "She's poison, nephew. She'll destroy us all if we let her live." "I told you already," the king said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She stays. And I told you that's impossible." Craven's composure finally cracked. "Look what she's done to you. Look how weak you've become. Our enemies will smell it on you like blood in the water. Using our resources wisely isn't weakness. It's madness," Craven spat. "She's made you forget who you are, what you are. You're the Alpha King, not some lovesick fool mooning over an Omega." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Serena's cheeks burned with shame and something else. Hope, maybe, or terror, at having her feelings so brutally exposed. "You've lost sight of reason," the king said quietly. "This has gone too far." "Too far?" Craven laughed bitterly. "I raised you from nothing. I saved you when your parents' weakness would have gotten you killed. I made you strong, made you king. And this is how you repay me?" His hand moved to his belt, drawing a wicked-looking dagger. Its blade gleamed with the same oily sheen Serena remembered from his earlier injury. "Poison. If you won't be the king I made you to be," Craven said sadly. "Then perhaps it's time for new leadership." He struck without warning. The blade aimed straight at the king's heart. But the king was faster, catching his uncle's wrist and twisting until the dagger clattered to the floor. What followed was terrible to witness. Uncle and nephew, teacher and student, locked in deadly combat. They were evenly matched in skill, but the king had youth and strength on his side. He should win easily. But then the guards joined the fight. "For the true Alpha," one shouted, his sword singing as it cut through the air. "For strength," another cried, his blade seeking the king's spine. They were outnumbered 5-1, but the king fought like a man possessed. His claws tore through armor, his strength sending grown warriors flying. But there were too many, and they kept coming. Serena watched in horror as a sword found its mark, then another. The king staggered but didn't fall, his golden eyes still blazing with determination. He was magnificent in his fury, terrible and beautiful, and utterly doomed. Then she saw Craven rising behind him, the poisoned dagger gleaming in his hand. "Look out!" she screamed, but it was too late. The blade slid between the king's ribs with surgical precision, finding the gap in his armor as if guided by fate. His eyes went wide with shock and pain, but instead of falling, something terrible awakened in his golden gaze. "I'm sorry," Craven whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry it had to end this way, but I won't let you destroy everything we built." The king looked up at him, blood frothing at his lips. For a moment, nephew and uncle stared at each other, the man who raised him and the man who would kill him. Then the king's claws extended with a sound like steel on stone. "So am I," he whispered. His hand punched through Craven's chest in one fluid motion, claws piercing heart and lung with deadly precision. Craven's eyes went wide with shock, then dimmed as life left them. He toppled backward, his body hitting the stone floor with a final hollow thud. The king swayed, the effort of that last strike costing him dearly. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed forward into Serena's waiting arms. The poison worked quickly. Already, his skin was taking on the gray pallor she remembered from Craven's injury, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. She could feel his life slipping away like sand through her fingers. "No," she whispered, her hands already beginning to glow. "No, I won't let you die. Not like this." But even as she poured her power into him, she knew it might not be enough. The silver poison was attacking his heart and lungs, spreading faster than she could contain it. She'd saved Craven, but he'd been treated immediately. The king had fought with the poison inside him, accelerating its spread. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face as she fought the poison's relentless advance. "Please don't leave me. I need you. We all need you." His breathing hitched, growing even shallower. "Serena." His lips moved without sound, forming her name over and over like a prayer. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open, lost somewhere between life and death. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning closer. "I'm here. I won't leave you." A desperate idea formed in her mind. Risky, untested, but all she had left. Instead of fighting the poison from the outside, she would go in after it. She placed her hands directly over his heart, and instead of just sending healing energy into him, she sent a part of herself. The world around her faded as her consciousness plunged into darkness. She could feel the poison now, taste its bitter corruption as it flowed through his veins, see the damage it left in its wake. But she could also feel something else, his life force, dim but still fighting, a golden glow pulsing weakly against the encroaching shadow. "Fight with me," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her in this place. "Don't give up." Her own light reached for his, tendrils of silver energy intertwining with gold. Where they met, the darkness retreated, unable to withstand their combined strength. Together, they drove back the poison, inch by painful inch. Serena could feel her own strength fading, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not when she could feel his light growing stronger, feeding off her energy, his will to live burning brighter with each passing moment. They carried the king to his chambers immediately, a procession of terrified servants and loyal guards moving with urgency through the fortress corridors. Serena never let go of his hand, her healing energy flowing into him even as they climbed the winding stairs. By the time they reached his private chambers, word had spread through the fortress like wildfire. Craven was dead. The king was dying. Everything they'd known was crumbling. But Serena only had eyes for the man laid carefully on the massive bed before her. All that mattered was the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the gray pallor spreading across his skin. She knelt beside his bed, her hands pressed against his chest, pouring every ounce of her healing energy into his failing body. The silver poison fought her at every turn, resisting her power like acid burning through silk. Hours passed. Servants came and went in whispered silence, bringing food she didn't touch and water she barely sipped. Rowan stood guard at the door, his scarred face grim with worry. But Serena never moved, never stopped fighting for his life. She loved him. Not the alpha king with his cold authority and ruthless reputation, but the man underneath, the one who carried her up a mountain when she was too weak to walk, who sat vigil beside her as she saved his uncle's life. She loved his strength and his gentleness. She loved the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was precious rather than property, and she was going to lose him. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she fought the poison's relentless advance. "Please don't leave me. I need you. We all need you." His breathing hitched, grew even shallower. "Serena?" His lips moved without sound, forming her name over and over like a prayer. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open, lost somewhere between life and death. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning closer. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Serena drew on the last reserves of her strength, letting her consciousness sink deeper into the connection between them. There, in that intimate space where their energies merged, she felt it. A flicker of recognition, a reaching out. Not just his body fighting to live, but his spirit reaching for hers. She grasped that connection with all her might, weaving her energy through his, creating a bridge back to life. Her own life force mingled with the healing light, a desperate gamble that might save him or kill them both. The poison finally broke, like a dam bursting. Her healing energy flooded through him, washing away the silver corruption. His skin cleared, his breathing deepened, and color returned to his ashen face. Serena collapsed beside him, utterly spent, but he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. Dawn was breaking through the tall windows when his eyes finally opened. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling in confusion. Then his gaze found hers. "Serena," he breathed, and this time, his voice was strong and clear. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "This is all my fault. If I had just listened, if I had stayed in my place." "Stop." His hand found hers. "Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices." "But my lord." "Darius," he corrected gently. "My name is Darius." The intimacy of it made her breath catch. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving me, for saving all of us." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with infinite care. "Serena," he said softly, "my fierce little healer, my heart." When his lips touched hers, the kiss was soft, reverent, as if he was afraid she might shatter beneath his touch. But when she melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his dark hair, he deepened it with a quiet desperation that spoke of nearly losing everything that matters. Spring came to the fortress, and with it, transformation. Where once there were only training grounds, gardens now bloomed with healing herbs. The clash of weapons still rang through the courtyards, but now it was accompanied by laughter and encouragement. Warriors who once trained to dominate now learned to protect, understanding at last that true strength lies in defending others. Darius moved through his pack like a changed wolf. His power hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, but now it was tempered with wisdom. Where once he ruled through fear, he led through respect. Young wolves no longer cowered in his presence. Instead, they sought his guidance, knowing they'd find both strength and mercy in his counsel. The fortress itself seemed to breathe easier. Music drifted from the great hall where once there was only silence. Pups played in corridors that once echoed with harsh commands. Even the stone walls appeared warmer, as if the love that transformed the pack had seeped into the very foundation of their home. On the night of the full moon, when the pack gathered in the courtyard, Darius took Serena's hand before them all. The mighty alpha who once saw kindness as weakness now looked at her with undisguised devotion. "You were brought here as a servant," he said, his deep voice carrying to every ear. "But you freed us all. You've taught us that true strength isn't about how many we can defeat, but how many we can protect. You didn't just heal our wounds, you healed our hearts." Under the silver light of the moon, he marked her as his mate, his gentle bite a promise of eternal love. Their wolves twined together, black and silver, strength and mercy, two halves of a whole finally united. A year had passed since Darius claimed Serena as his mate, and the northern territories flourished under their joint rule. The fortress, once a monument to fear and pain, had transformed into a true sanctuary. Wolves from neighboring territories whispered of the strange new ways of the Alpha King's pack, of warriors who showed mercy, of healers welcomed instead of scorned, of a strength built on protection rather than domination. Many dismissed these tales as fantasy. After all, everyone knew the Alpha King Darius was the most brutal ruler the territories had ever seen. His name alone had once been enough to silence children's cries, but those who ventured into his lands found the rumors were true. On this particular morning, Serena stood on the highest balcony of the fortress, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Her hand rested on the gentle curve of her belly, feeling the subtle movements within. The pack's healer had confirmed it just days ago. She was carrying the Alpha King's heir. "There you are," Darius's voice came from behind her, deep and warm. His arms encircled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as he placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "My mate and my pup bathed in sunlight. I don't think I've ever seen anything more beautiful." Serena leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year." "Everything has changed," he murmured, his lips brushing her temple. "Because of you." She smiled, turning in his arms to face him. The golden eyes that once terrified her now filled her with comfort and joy. "We changed it together." A discreet cough interrupted their moment. Rowan stood at the balcony entrance, his expression apologetic. "Forgive me, my king, my queen. The delegation from the Eastern Territories has arrived." Darius sighed, pressing his forehead briefly against Serena's. "Duty calls. Go," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "I'll join you later." After he left, Serena made her way to what had once been the dungeons. Now transformed into healing chambers, the rooms were bright and airy, filled with shelves of herbs and healing supplies. She had trained 7 apprentices over the past year, wolves with a natural aptitude for healing who had previously hidden their talents for fear of being seen as weak. Among them was Rowan's daughter, Alara, who greeted Serena with a bright smile. "We've prepared everything for today's clinic," she said, gesturing to the organized workstations. "Word has spread. There are already 30 wolves waiting." Serena nodded, pleased. Once a week they opened the healing chambers to any in need, pack members and visitors alike. What had started as a handful of nervous patients had grown into a steady stream of wolves, seeking help without shame. As the morning progressed, Serena moved from patient to patient. A hunter with a dislocated shoulder, a pup with a fever, an elderly wolf whose arthritis made shifting painful. Each received not just healing, but respect, their pain acknowledged, their relief celebrated. By midday, Serena was ready for a brief rest. She retreated to a quiet alcove, sipping a cup of herbal tea, when she noticed a hooded figure lingering near the entrance, hesitant to approach. "We welcome all who seek healing," Serena called gently. "There's no need to hide." The figure stiffened, then slowly approached, pulling back the hood to reveal a face Serena had never expected to see again. Her father, older now, his face lined with worry and grief, but unmistakably the man who had once offered her up to the tax collector to save her sister. "Serena?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "My daughter." She froze, her cup halfway to her lips. A storm of emotions crashed through her. Anger, hurt, confusion. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been pushing her to her knees before the beta, offering her as payment for their debts. "Why are you here?" she finally managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Aurora is sick," he said, his eyes downcast. "Our healers can't help her. I heard rumors that the Alpha King's mate was a powerful healer, but I never dreamed." He trailed off, his hands twisting together. "I didn't know it was you until I saw you just now." Serena's heart clenched at the mention of her sister, Aurora, who had been protected and cherished while Serena was discarded. Aurora, who had stood by silently as their father offered Serena to the beta. "What ails her?" Serena asked, her voice carefully neutral. "A wasting sickness. She grows weaker each day. She can barely shift anymore." There was genuine fear in his eyes, the same fear that had driven him to sacrifice his eldest daughter. Serena should refuse. After what they had done, she owed them nothing. And yet, "Bring her to me," she said, rising from her seat. "I will see what can be done." Her father's eyes widened with disbelief and hope. "You would help her? After everything?" Serena looked at him steadily. "I am not the same broken girl you sold to save yourself. I am the Alpha Queen, and I heal because it is what I choose to do, not because of who deserves it." Later, when she told Darius of her decision, he studied her face with concern. "Are you certain about this? After how they treated you?" "I'm certain," she said softly. "Once, I told you a story where a woman's worth wasn't measured by the children she could bear. Now I understand that our worth isn't measured by how others treat us either. It's measured by the choices we make, especially when those choices are difficult. Darius pulled her close, his golden eyes shining with pride and love. Then we will welcome your sister, and you will heal her if you can. And your father. My father will see what I have become, Serena finished for him. Not despite being cast aside, but because of the strength I found in that darkness. That is all the justice I need. When Aurora arrived, weak and pale on a stretcher, Serena approached her sister's bedside without bitterness. The girl's eyes widened with recognition, then filled with tears of shame. "Serena," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I let them send you away." Serena took her sister's hand, feeling the fever burning beneath her skin. "That's in the past now. Rest. I'm going to help you." For 3 days, Serena worked tirelessly to purge the illness from Aurora's body. She used every technique she had learned, every ounce of her considerable power. And when it wasn't enough, Darius lent her his strength, their mated bond allowing her to channel his alpha power into her healing. On the 4th day, Aurora opened her eyes, clear and bright for the first time in months. "You saved me," she said in wonder. "After everything..." Serena smiled, genuine and warm. Being able to heal isn't just about having the power to do so. It's about choosing to use that power, even when it's difficult. That evening, as the pack celebrated Aurora's recovery, Serena stood before her father. He had aged decades in the year since she'd last seen him. His shoulders stooped with guilt and regret. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "But I am grateful beyond words for what you've done." "I didn't heal Aurora for your gratitude," Serena replied. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because the strength I found here taught me that true power lies not in domination or cruelty, but in the choice to be kind when the world has shown you none." She placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling the future stirring within. "My child will grow up knowing that being different isn't a weakness, that compassion isn't a liability, that a pack thrives not through fear, but through care for one another." Her father bowed his head, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You became everything I failed to see in you." "No," Serena corrected him gently. "I became what I always was. Someone just needed to see it." From across the great hall, Darius met her eyes, his golden gaze filled with pride and understanding. In him, she had found not just a mate, but a partner who valued her strength, who saw her worth when others saw only broken pieces. Together, they were rewriting the old stories of what it meant to be strong, of what made a pack thrive, of how even the deepest wounds could heal when tended with care and love. And as Serena stood in the fortress that had once been her prison and was now her home, surrounded by a pack that had once feared healing and now embraced it, she knew that they were creating a new kind of tale, one where being different wasn't a curse, but a gift, where strength came in many forms, and where even those deemed broken could rise to change the world. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.